Hey Nick, how are you?
I'm following you.
Good,
Back
good.
with another PLA. And we'll start with the question for you this morning, Bruno. So this is with regards to spoliation. So we've dealt with spoliation quite a lot on this channel, with what it is and such things. But we've specifically got a question now from our writers who've basically said, look, what are the consequences of this spoliation? We've been told that we mustn't do it. But what are the consequences of deciding that we don't want to go through the eviction process and instead trying to spoliate a tenant in a property?
So get the question often, what's the worst that could happen if I don't follow the correct eviction process? And every time we have conversations with potential clients, obviously they believe that we're trying to sell the eviction process to them because it's obviously the work that we do and that we attend to. What is the worst case scenario if a person does not follow the eviction process? And is it really that bad? And I think we need to answer that, because the problem is, if people do not have an idea of what could potentially go wrong, they will never understand the benefits of doing it the correct way. And all this information is verifiable. So it's something that you can pick up on the internet relatively easily. So the first and foremost, attending to an eviction or conducting an eviction unlawfully is illegal. By legal, it means there's a criminal offense that is associated with it. And this criminal offense could lead to imprisonment and a fine. Why? Because housing is a very important principle or concept or need, right, in our law in South Africa. And any form of unlawful eviction is going to be met with consequences. And yes, it has happened before. There have been situations where property owners have been fined or have been arrested for conducting unlawful eviction. So it is a real thing, and it is a crime in terms of our legislation. So what's the next potential consequence? Now, everyone's heard of spoliation. What's spoliation? It basically means restoration. If something is removed from somebody else by force and unlawfully so, possession of it is returned, right? Now, people struggle with this concept because when I say unlawful, right, the problem is, yes, I understand that the occupier of the property might be there unlawfully, but you removing the occupier from the property without a court order is also unlawful. So by you conducting yourself in that manner, unfortunately, the problem is that you are performing an unlawful act. And by performing an unlawful act, you will be subjected to the court restoring the occupier possession of the property. Now, this applies in our law in every sense in our law. If anything is done without the rules being followed, the court can restore the position as it was. It does seem unfair, I get it, because the person is there unlawfully, and you cannot fathom or understand why a court would support them and put them back. But it's to avoid the situation of self-help. And to give you a small example of this, you need to look at these issues from different perspectives, and sometimes we lack perspective. As a landlord with an unlawful occupier, you're looking at this from the perspective going, but it's clear as day, this should not be granted. They should not be restored possession of the property. But what you do need to understand is there have been situations where a tenant has been unlawfully stopped from going to the property, for not for the failure of paying rent and the lease hasn't been cancelled, none of that. Sometimes it's just personal animosity, where a landlord no longer wants a tenant on the property and he locks the tenant out. You need to understand that the reason why the court intervenes in these housing situations to ensure that whatever decision is made is the correct decision as between both parties, and that it's not the landlord that's abusing the tenant, which does happen, nor the tenant that's abusing the landlord. So that's the second consequence that you need to bear in mind. Is you do an unlawful eviction, there is a very, very, very high chance that that very same afternoon, this tenant is back on the property. And unfortunately, now you're down in costs. And as litigation goes, the psychological component of it, you've just lost credibility. So now you're approaching a court off the bat of having done something unlawful. Even the tenant is more likely to resist an eviction because of this unlawful conduct. Now, the third thing to bear in mind, and I emphasize on this one a lot because people don't really think about it when attending to these unlawful evictions. What happens, as an example, where you want to make the person's occupation miserable? So you go remove roof tiles and it rains and there's damage to property, right? Guess what? You can be liable. What happens if you lock the door and there's heart medication inside the property and the person dies? Not only could you be liable for damage, but there's a possibility even that you'd be liable for culpable homicide. What happens if you lock out a tenant or whatever, you lock the doors and there's children inside, and now you don't know that there's children inside? There's a variety of different things. Another form of damages, you lock the door and now the tenant has to go stay at a hotel for the evening or 2 evenings while they try to get an order to restore their possession to the property. All these things comprise damages. Damages are claimed from the person that conducted themselves unlawfully. The same way you can claim damages from a tenant for staying in your property unlawfully, the tenant can claim damages from you, the landlord, for unlawfully dispossessing him of the property. And I have seen examples of situations where the damages that the landlord may owe the tenant are higher than the arrear rentals the tenant owes the landlord. And that example about the hard medication inside the property once locked, that's a real life example. And the tenant almost passed away because of that. So bear that in mind. Fortunately, in that instance, the landlord did see what happened and opened the premises up immediately. But had they not, there could have been very, very severe consequences. Now, to wrap this all up, some people might be asking me, but what is eviction? And this unlawful eviction. What if I just lock the door? What if I remove the door? I'm not evicting them. That's nothing wrong with that. Take the roof tiles off. That's not evicting them. They've got the property now, right? Just because, remember, eviction, you look at eviction as the removal of somebody from the property. Constructive eviction is making the circumstances so intolerable that the person cannot stay on the property, where you're almost rendering this property uninhabitable. Do not play around in a gray area and hope to come out on top. We have had this argument with many, many landlords, many times, where there's very creative designs of ways to make the tenant's life difficult. But the bottom line is the tenant cannot stay in the property or cannot get to the property inside, you're probably unlawfully evicting them. So just keep this in mind. Again, this is just a warning. The decision is up to you at the end of the day, but do understand that the worst case scenario, and if these scenarios play out, can actually be quite bad.